So you're about to watch a workshop that I ran for 160 people. I walk through 10 very specific upgrades to Cowork that I think will give you an immediately better experience. Some of them are custom skills that I've made myself. Some of them are skills I've found that I now use every single day. And some of them are MCPs or connectors that just immediately enhance the responses that you're going to get from Cowork. I've packaged all of this up. If you click the link in the description, you can download everything that I'm going to talk about, and you can follow along and apply each of these to your own setup as I show you how to do it. Even if you've started using Cowork, I reckon you haven't set it up in a way that is going to give you like amazing results, and you might still be using it a bit like you were using Chat, just on your computer now instead of in the cloud. So we want to set up Cowork as this co-worker, like as this teammate that knows all about us, knows what we're trying to achieve, and every response it gives, it's trying to help us achieve our goals. So I've got 10 upgrades to show you. There are 3 sections to this workshop. One is like setting up Claude so that it really, really knows you, not just the facts about you, but it actually knows your blind spots, your shadows, the sort of traps you fall into maybe when you're under stress, so that Claude becomes not just like a co-worker getting work done for you, but actually a bit of a coach that's helping you like push through perhaps like difficult periods of work. Then I'm going to show you some upgrades that give you like more reliable answers from Claude. And if you're going to use Cowork to build anything, I'll teach you a method that gives you even better results in less time. And then we're going to set up Cowork so that it's actually improving itself, and every week it gets a bit smarter of its own volition. So if you apply these changes at the end, then like 4 weeks from now, Claude should be remarkably more intelligent and like more helpful than it is today. Throughout this, I'm going to mention like skills and things that I'll send to you on email afterwards. So I think this workshop isn't exactly interactive. We're not going to be like setting things up together right now. But if you see something that you think is going to be helpful, just make a note of that, and then I'll send you an email with all the links in about 4 or 5 hours, and then start applying them. Okay, so section 1, like making Claude actually know all about you. If you have been using Claude Chat, then Claude probably knows like quite a few things about you already. Claude has this notion of memory where it selectively decides to remember certain facts. And if you've been using Claude Chat for months, then Claude has built up a sort of hazy memory of who you are. And there are quite a lot of things in there. But it's hidden away and it doesn't get updated all the time, and it can go stale. So what we can do is we can basically extract Claude's memories in Claude Chat and start saving them in files in Cowork. So throughout this workshop, I'm going to talk about context files. These are just like text files or files on your computer. And we're going to talk about building this main folder that you work in. And over time, Claude just gets more and more context on you. And so this folder becomes more and more detailed. So one of the first things we can do is go to Claude Chat and say, everything that you know about me, let's fact check it, and then let's store it in some files so that Cowork knows all of that about me. And so before we do this, you can say to Claude, what do you know about me? And it might give you some like stale facts, or it might have just like gotten some things wrong. So it will give you like a summary of what it knows, and there's probably stuff in there that is out of date. So if we extract everything into these files, then Claude will start like systematically going through what it thinks it knows about you. It will give like confidence ratings to those facts, and it will basically ask you like, is this correct? Is this still correct? And you'll go through this sort of interview. And then at the end, it will say, okay, here is your context folder. So I've sort of grouped everything I know about you into a few files, like basic facts about you, basic facts about your role, some facts about what you're trying to achieve, how you like to work with me or how you like to communicate, and then a few more things that we need to verify. So if you go through this exercise, you'll get these files and you can then work with them in Cowork. And Cowork now has like a fuller understanding of you, because that memory in Claude Chat that we were talking about, I don't think Cowork actually has access to that. Cowork and Chat are still quite separate. Now, you don't need to remember all of this. I'm going to give you a skill afterwards called crystallize memory. And if you haven't come across skills before, they're basically just really long prompts. So this skill, if you run it in Claude, or you can also run it in ChatGPT, if you run /crystallize memory, then it will go through this exercise of extracting all the things that it thinks it knows about you, confirming what is fact, what is fiction, what is stale, and then it will give you a set of files for you to put into Cowork so that Cowork now knows all those things about you. So that whole exercise probably takes like 5 or 10 minutes, but I think if you do that, then your experience with Cowork will be like much better. I can see in the chat there is a question about, can we migrate ChatGPT to Cowork? Yes, we can. I've built another skill for migrating from ChatGPT to Cowork. So I'll make a note to share that with you afterwards. Okay, so that was upgrade number 1. Let's talk a bit more then about this concept of a second brain. The second brain is basically a folder of files about you and your life and your business that previously was just for people who were a bit nerdy and wanted to sort of keep a library of everything that they'd ever come across on the internet. But now it's becoming this very important like piece of context for agents. So when we talk about building a second brain, we are just talking about organizing lots of information about us and about our work into a format that an agent can very easily sort of read. And your agent is only really as good as the context it has. If you open a blank ChatGPT conversation and say, help me plan my day, it will ask you 10 different questions and it will give you very generic advice. But if you have this second brain, if you have all this context in Claude already, and you say, help me plan my day, it will give you a much more valuable answer. So I've done this exercise now with, I think, 200 people, and there's a few files that really help Claude. One is actually just going through your role and like what you do, the type of work you do, who you work with, what you're sort of aiming for. And again, at the end, I'll share a skill with you that kind of helps you create all of this. But if you show Claude, like, here's what I'm doing and here's how I work, here's my background and like my career so far, here is how I like to work. We'll talk a bit more about this in a second, but I also have an interview where Claude asks you, how do you want me to help you? Do you want me to be blunt? Do you want me to be soft? Do you want me to be a cheerleader or sort of intense? So if you also tell Claude, hey, here's how I want to be helped, and then you tell it, here's what I'm aiming for, here are my goals, here are decisions we've made over time, and then I'll talk about this a little bit later, but like, if you've heard of a retro before, which is basically like a meeting you do every Friday to reflect on what went well, you can start doing that with Claude every Friday, and then Claude gradually builds up this picture of like what we're trying to achieve. So basically, you can start building a second brain by just organizing a few files about you, and Claude will immediately become more helpful. So I have a skill, it's called Set Up My Second Brain. And again, I'll share it with you afterwards. And it will ask you loads of questions. Like if you do this properly, it will probably take you, I mean, this is the big one. I think this will take you like 2 or 3 hours if you do this thoroughly. But then your experience of Claude from now until the end of time will be much, much better. So you can rush through this in 10 minutes and come back to it, or you can sit down and spend like 3 hours answering all these questions. But once you do that, Claude just knows so much more about you and gives you far more helpful answers. So it will keep asking you all these questions. And then when you say, okay, help me plan my day, it will know what you're trying to achieve. It will have some history on you, and it will just immediately be more helpful. And this is a little bit more advanced. This is like actually a simplified version of my second brain. So as well as, Claude knowing about who I am, what I'm doing, my background, how I want to be coached, I've also got some strategy documents in here. I've got some information on competitors that I've put together. I'm running experiments, growth experiments, and working on a referral program. I've been doing these weekly retros. I've got all these transcripts from coaching calls that I've done. I've set up some files about projects I'm working on. I have an inspiration file for like people and businesses that inspire me. Like this has been, I guess, a labor of love over the last like 7 or 8 months. But it means that Claude just knows me and my business inside out. And my experience with Claude is like hyper personalized. So yeah, you can start with just these sort of simple files, and then naturally, as you work with this system, Claude will become the sort of librarian of your second brain, and it will suggest, let's create a new file here. Why don't we combine these files? Why don't we start a new folder? And so this folder just keeps kind of expanding over time. So yeah, I'll share afterwards this skill called set up my second brain. And I do highly recommend setting aside some time to just like work through these questions. If you have an app like Whisperflow, or if you have any sort of voice dictation software, you can just sort of talk out loud, and then Claude will take all of that and structure it for you. One of the other benefits of this, by the way, before we move on to number 3, so we've talked here about creating a folder of files on your computer. This is not in the cloud. This is not like hosted on Anthropic's servers somewhere. It's not in a Google Drive. It's not in Notion. It's like a set of text files on your computer. One of the benefits of doing this is that in the future, if you decide, I actually hate Claude and I want to go back to ChatGPT, or I've just found this Chinese open source AI model that costs 1 penny per million tokens. I want to use that instead. If you have all these files on your computer, you can actually just point a different agent at those files and it will sort of pick up where the last one left off. So by doing this, you're actually getting some sovereignty over your information. It's not locked up in Claude, it's on your computer. And if you decide to switch to a different agent in the future, it's very, very easy to do so. Okay, everyone following so far? I'm aware that I'm moving quite briskly to get through 10 items in about 50 minutes. Okay, there's no one said slow down in the chat, so I'm going to keep going. Okay, number 3. If Claude knows your shadows or your failure modes, it can basically become quite a good coach. And everything I'm showing you is stuff that I use like every single day. Some of these examples are like slightly redacted, but Claude knows when I am procrastinating. It knows how I generally procrastinate. And it often, to be honest, calls me out on my bullshit. And the reason it does that, the reason it's capable of doing that, is that I went through this interview I mentioned earlier about how I want to be coached. And now, one of my failure modes is I just start building stuff. I start building parts of my website. I start tweaking things in the product instead of, working on sales or marketing, for example. So now if I start talking to Claude and I say, let's rebuild the entire onboarding flow, that seems like a good thing to do on a Thursday night at 8 p.m. Claude will often come back and say, hang on a minute, like, I don't think you need to do that right now. I actually think you need to go and reply to these 5 emails, or you actually need to go and like market this workshop, for example. So out of the box, these LLMs, you've probably seen that they have sycophantic tendencies. ChatGPT is more sycophantic than Claude, but generally, if you say to an AI, help me do this thing, if you haven't customized it, it will just gladly help you do that thing. So as you go through this like coaching sort of interview and you show Claude, actually, when I'm stressed, this is how I sort of start to behave, or this is the way that I procrastinate, or sometimes I go and research things in far too much detail instead of just doing the thing. If Claude knows that, then it will actually start pushing back a bit and challenging you. And I personally have found this really, really helpful. So you go through this interview, Claude asks you loads of questions, and then at the end it does save this like coaching style file. By the way, if you've never seen a .md file, that's just a markdown file, which is just a text file. So everything I've talked about so far, they're just very small text files called markdown files. So yeah, this is a slightly redacted version of mine, but Claude knows that I sometimes go down rabbit holes in the code instead of working on sales or marketing. I am a perfectionist, and I sometimes spend way too long getting something to be absolutely perfect when good enough was probably good enough. I do also go down research rabbit holes, and AI is sometimes a bit of an enabler for this. So Claude knows this, and then it'll occasionally ask me, like, do you really need to work on this, or are you putting off something else? Or do you really need to finish this entire project right now, or could we just do like the MVP, the minimum viable product? So yeah, Claude is now not confrontational, but just more aware of my like behavior, and I've genuinely found that incredibly helpful over the last few months. This is actually an example where I thought rebuilding an onboarding flow would be a good idea, and it wasn't. So yeah, you can see that Claude just like is getting better at telling me to focus on what really matters. So all of that, again, is included in this skill that I'll send you afterwards, which is like set up my second brain. So don't really need to take any notes on this right now. You basically just need to go and get this skill, run it, and then Claude will like set up all of this for you. Okay, this one's a little bit more advanced. Has anyone heard of a guy called Andre Karpathy before? Getting some big thumbs up there from Mike. Okay, Andre is like one of the godfathers of LLMs. He now works at Anthropic, and he came up with this idea of an LLM wiki. And basically, he said, if you've got loads of files, if you've got loads of text files, it's really helpful, first of all, if your LLM has like an index of those files, just kind of explaining what each file is about. So you can help Claude find what it needs faster if it has an index of everything in a certain folder. So that was like step one. But then he came up with a few more principles. So he said, if every file has like a summary at the top, and if all your files link to each other, a bit like Wikipedia, then LLMs can more easily sort of traverse and navigate your like all your text files, and they'll spend fewer tokens and they'll find what they need far quicker. And so he suggested that when you're using these markdown files, you structure them a bit like this. So you have a title, a summary of what the file is about, maybe some tags. You have these links to other files so that, you know, for example, this decisions file is related to my goals, and it's also related to my competitors. And down here, I'm linking to the roadmap. And again, I'm linking to competitors. So this isn't something that we as humans would think to do. But if we tell Claude, I want you to apply these principles to my second brain, then we'll start to see like more efficient information retrieval. Basically, Claude will find what it needs faster. It will make fewer mistakes. It will spend fewer tokens trying to find information. And so all you need to do is let me just see if I can find this quickly here. So Andre Karpathy put together this big sort of article where he says, here's the core idea of like an LLM wiki, and here's how I think you should like architect it, and here's how the operations work. Like the summary I've just given you is a pretty simplified version of this. Again, you don't actually need to go and like figure all this out yourself. You basically just tell Claude Cowork, I want you to apply these principles to my second brain folder. So like you give Claude that URL, which I'll send to you afterwards, and you say, help me structure this folder, this like second brain or this context folder, using these principles from the LLM wiki. And Claude will probably go off and spend 15 or 20 minutes changing your files a little bit and adding summaries and adding links between files and creating these indexes. But after it's done that, it will be faster at finding what it needs. And once your folder starts to look a bit more like this, this is a very simplified version of my second brain. I think my second brain now has 1,900 files in it. So it's quite important that Claude can find what it needs quickly, otherwise it will just burn tokens looking at the wrong files. So as your second brain starts to evolve and this folder gets more and more complex with more and more nested folders, having these like LLM wiki principles applied makes a big difference. So again, I'll send an email afterwards. You just need to like copy a prompt and a URL into Claude and it will know what to do and it will do it for you. So if you do those 4 things, you have like quite a nice second brain, and Claude starts giving you far better responses, and this will become a sort of hobby or like a project to sort of like teach Claude everything you want it to know about you. And if you know anyone that's done this already, they're probably a bit fanatical now about, their second brain, because it's a very, very valuable resource. I'm not sure why this has just crashed. There we go. So that was section 1, making Claude know more about us. Section 2 is getting better answers from Claude, and making its answers more reliable and having it sort of stress test its own work. So I've got 2 skills I'm going to share with you. The first one is called multi-agent refine. Now, if you're working on a big document or a project or a deck, if there's like some important piece of work that you're doing, this skill basically spins up what's called subagents. So you have your main Claude doing work, and then your main Claude can create mini Claudes that go and review this piece of work from different angles. So when you run this skill, for example, I was actually reviewing a contract for an office that I'm about to move into, and I'll show you the example in a second, but I was like reviewing the clauses of the contract and I was trying to figure out my negotiating position. I was doing some research on what is normal in an office contract. And once I'd done that, I then ran this skill, multi-agent refine, and I said, okay, let's like just take a few different angles, spin up some subagents and just check that our thinking is solid. So firstly, Claude asked me some clarifying questions, and then it said, okay, I'm going to run a fact check. So I'm going to go and like consult the internet again. I'm just going to check that what we've got in our sort of negotiating document is correct. I'm going to see if we've missed anything out. I'm going to play devil's advocate on some of the suggestions I've made already. And then I'm going to check that our negotiating position is clear. And so basically it spins up these 4 subagents, and they all go off independently and then report back to the main Claude with their findings. So you get like more opinions, more points of view on whatever it is you're working on than just your main Claude and you. So for example, I actually ran this. Let me see if I can, I don't have Claude open at the moment, but I ran this and I said, run multi-agent refine on like the last response that we just worked on. And so firstly, Claude said, what matters most? And I said, well, actually, the thing I'm really caring about right now is my negotiating position. And then it said, do you want me to do a first review and then get your input? Or do you want me to do like 2 or 3 reviews until I think it's good? And I said, just go autonomously. Just keep going until you think this is better. And so firstly, there was one critic sort of checking our negotiating position. There was one doing like a legal fact check on everything we talked about. There was one just checking whether we'd missed anything out. And then there was one like almost like playing the role of the, what's the word? Not the adversary, but like the negotiating partner. It basically pretended to be the office provider and looked at my negotiating position and sort of tried to figure out if it was clear. So I had these 4 opinions, then it came back and said, actually, here's some improvements. And actually, I made a mistake earlier. I claimed X, but actually Y is correct. So this is just really, really helpful when you're working on any like big piece of work and you've spent a while on it, and then you just want a few more pairs of eyes on a piece of work. You can use this multi-agent refine skill. It'll ask you like, what are you optimizing for here? And then it will spin up sub-agents. And subagents are a feature that are not available in Claude Chat. So this is one of the powerful things about Claude Cowork, is that it can sort of create mini Claudes, have them go off on sort of mini missions, and then come back and synthesize all of the answers. So yeah, again, I'll share this afterwards. I think this is quite powerful. This can take up to like, again, 15 or 20 minutes. But it basically helps you strengthen any argument, any document, any piece of work from multiple perspectives. If you have used Claude Code, by the way, there is a feature in Claude Code called /goal, which is similar to this. And it tells Claude, like, keep going until you're sure this is correct. But that feature doesn't exist in Cowork. So this is a slightly different equivalent of the goal feature in Claude Code. Okay. There's a lot of chat in the chat. I'm going to plow on. If you've got more questions, please do keep asking in the chat. Please keep answering them. And then at the end, I will come back to the chat and try and answer anything that's not answered, because we've got 5 more to get through. Okay. Quick show of hands. I can see like 50 of you. Thumbs up if you know what a PRD is. Okay, some of you. A PRD is a product requirements document. And this has existed for a long time in the world of product development. When we are building a new feature, building a new product, we write these product requirements documents so that everyone's really clear on why we're building this, how we're going to build it, the decisions we've made. And before AI, this was just a document that a product manager would write, and they would get every stakeholder to sort of lend their opinion, and they would talk to the developers, and they'd talk to the designers, and they'd talk to customers, and eventually they'd have this really big document that said, here's what we're going to build, here's why we're building it, and here's how we're going to build it. And it turns out that if you take that approach to creating anything in Claude, whether it is like a piece of code and a web app, whether you're creating a dashboard in Cowork, whether you're trying to automate something between like Cowork and another platform, if you write a PRD, Claude will give you much, much, much better responses, and you will save a lot of headaches, and you will avoid a lot of like bugs in whatever it is you build. So what I'm about to show you applies to basically anything slightly complicated that you want to create in Claude Cowork. Could be a piece of code, or it could be like a dashboard or something. So if you don't use a PRD and you say something like, I'm running a workshop, Claude, can you build me a landing page? Then it will make so many assumptions. It will just make decisions without asking you many questions. And I guarantee that like the landing page that Claude creates with this very, very basic prompt will not match what I want. I haven't told Claude what I want. I haven't really given it any direction, but this is how some people are approaching agents at the moment. So instead of just saying, build me this, and then maybe doing a bit of back and forth, I've got this skill that I'll share with you afterwards called /PRD, and it will run you through a structured interview. Claude will ask you a lot of questions about what you're trying to build and why, and it will create this PRD document for you. So first things first, Claude is asking, like, why are we trying to build this landing page? Like, what's the point? And we decide, okay, this is trying to convert people who are interested into like actually people who are in the workshop. And then why is this important? Because sometimes we build things that we don't actually need. So Claude will ask us several times, why do you need to build this? What is the problem you're solving? And then it will ask more and more questions. It'll ask some clarifying questions. Then it will ask for some context on, do you have anything that might help me build this landing page? And so that might be a granola transcript, it might be a brand document, it might be something else. And then at the end, it will say, okay, I've got this draft, I've got this PRD document. Let me just think through what might go wrong, and then I'll mitigate for that. So let me just read this plan and like try to figure out, actually, this is probably going to break, or this needs a bit of work. And that is basically avoiding pitfalls before you hit them. So Claude is sort of mitigating risks before you actually build anything. So going through this process, again, takes at least 10 or 15 minutes. I have sometimes spent several days on these documents if what I'm building is very complicated. But doing this avoids so many headaches and helps Claude understand like what it is you're trying to do and what it is you're trying to build. So a good PRD usually follows this structure. Like, this is the problem we're solving and why. Here's some context and references. Here's all the decisions that we went through while we were planning this. Here are the different milestones. So like, first things first, I'm going to build this, then I'm going to build this, and then I'm going to build this. It's sort of breaking down a big piece of work into milestones. Claude is also going to say, this is out of scope. So we're not going to build this fancy feature. We're not going to build this. We're going to keep it nice and defined. And then what could go wrong when we build this? What's the most likely reason that this doesn't work? And let's try to mitigate that before we even build anything. The other benefit of taking this approach is that it's quite cheap to edit text in Claude. So you can write quite a long document. You can spend a long time planning, and it doesn't take that many tokens. Claude is just sort of editing text at this point. It hasn't built anything. It hasn't automated anything. You're just talking in text. If you were to start building this straight away and then you found a problem, or you realized that Claude had made the wrong assumption, or you realized it did not look the way you wanted it, and you said, actually rebuild this, this is wrong, you've burned tokens. And editing code, or like editing dashboards or whatever it is you're building, uses more tokens than just editing text. So planning out what we want to do in like a text file before we build it is quite economical and helps us save tokens, which for many of us working at companies is quite important because we have a token budget or we have a limit. And the last thing we want is to hit our limit and then not be allowed to use Claude for several hours. So I wish I had more time to go into this because I've done like whole 2-hour workshops on this technique and people have loved the results. But if you're going to create anything, I suggest you try out this PRD skill where Claude will just interview you and get really clear on what you're trying to do before you do it. And it should save you some headaches. It should give you better results. There is a question on, can you build a PRD on something you've already started? Yes, you could. If you're in the middle of something that feels a bit messy, you could say to Claude, okay, before we continue, let's create a PRD for this. And let's just take stock of where we are, and then we will proceed. One other benefit of this that I forgot to mention in here, I'm guessing everyone's reached that point where you've had such a long conversation with Claude that it says context limit reached, compacting. And this is such an annoying process because Claude goes from feeling really smart to incredibly stupid, and it seems to forget everything that you've just talked about. That process is painful. If your entire sort of plan is living inside this conversation context limit, then when you run out of context, you lose all the detail. If your plan is sitting in a text file somewhere on your computer, and then you hit the limit and Claude has to summarize, it just looks at the plan again, and it says, oh, there's 5 milestones and we got to milestone 2. I'm just going to pick up where we left off. So by working with like plan files on our computer, instead of just like Claude's own memory, we don't have that painful experience of Claude forgetting everything and becoming stupid for like 5 or 10 minutes. It just picks up where it left off. So those are 2 skills for strengthening whatever you're working on, getting different perspectives, different points of view, and planning things out and avoiding the headaches of Claude, making the wrong assumptions, building the wrong thing, and sometimes even building something you don't need to build. Okay, finally, I'm going to talk about 3, I was going to say 3 things that let Claude improve itself, but actually I think this next one isn't quite about improving itself. I think this heading has appeared in the wrong place. I'm going to talk about one more, number 7, and then these are on self-improvement. Okay, quick yes or no, have you heard of Firecrawl before? Just thumbs up if you have. Brilliant, I get to teach you. Have you heard of Perplexity before? Okay, more nods for Perplexity. Basically, you might have seen in Claude that sometimes it tries to read a page on the internet and it can't read it. And it says, this page is blocked. I cannot access this page. And this happens because a lot of websites are now trying to prevent AI agents from reading them, and they're putting protections like bot protections in place. And before I installed Firecrawl, I was having this problem quite a lot. I was saying to Claude, here's a URL, I want you to go and read it, and then we'll talk about it. And it would just come back and it would say, like, I can't do that. I cannot read this page. Firecrawl is this amazing integration. You just install Firecrawl in Claude, and then it can basically turn any website into like a structured text file. And it can get around pretty much all of these like bot protections, and it can just read whatever is on the internet. So if you install Firecrawl, then Claude is able to kind of access the entire internet in a way that it wasn't before. I think Firecrawl, when you install it, you get something like 500 searches for free, and then it costs something pretty minuscule, like $5 or $10 a month. But yeah, instead of getting these like access denied messages from Claude, you get like a more reliable way of reading stuff that's on the internet. And if you want, you can say to Firecrawl, here are the websites of 10 of my competitors. I want you to scrape all of them, store them as markdown files, and put them in my second brain. And Firecrawl will do that very, very efficiently. So I'll send you a link to install that afterwards with some instructions. It's pretty straightforward. But yeah, I can't imagine going back to Claude without Firecrawl because it would feel like sort of taking a step down in capability. Perplexity is, as an AI company, they're starting to do quite a lot of things. They're building agents. They're building something called Perplexity Computer. But actually what they started out building was a very good AI search model. And you might have noticed that Cowork's web search sometimes isn't very comprehensive. I feel like I ask Claude to go and, search the internet for something, and it might look at 5 or 10 pages and then come back and give me an answer that it turns out was actually incorrect. Perplexity usually comes back with far more sources. The claims that it makes, in my experience, are far more reliable. Like if I get a piece of information from Perplexity, I trust it a lot more than if I just get a piece of information from Claude's own web search tool. So you can install Perplexity again as an integration, or sometimes it's called a connector. And you can basically override Claude's settings. And you can say, whenever I ask you to look at a web page, I want you to use Firecrawl. And whenever I ask you to confirm a fact or look something up on the internet, I want you to use Perplexity. And in my experience, since I've switched both of those on, I've just been able to rely on the information that Claude gives me from the public internet far more easily. Again, Perplexity's API is dirt cheap. I don't have the graph at the moment, but I've done something like 12,000 Perplexity searches this year. And I think I've spent like less than $50 or something like that in total. So for me, that is like a very, very manageable price for the peace of mind that the information I'm dealing with is actually verifiably accurate and less likely to be hallucinated. One other thing that Perplexity is very good at is accessing Reddit and sort of crawling Reddit. Cowork often struggles with reading Reddit threads or getting the whole thing. I won't go into all of that now, but Reddit have blocked certain search engines and certain crawlers from accessing their site. Perplexity is not one of those blocked sites. So if you ever want to find out what Reddit thinks about a certain topic, about a certain product, if you have competitors and you want to find out what Reddit thinks about them, Perplexity is a very, very good way to find that out. And I will send links to both of them afterwards as well. I think my earphones have just died. Can everyone still hear me? Brilliant. Okay, now let's talk about having Claude self-improve itself. one of the amazing things about Claude Cowork is that it can edit its own instructions, and it has like more editing functionality over itself. When you're in Claude Chat and you want to change like how Claude behaves, you have to do that manually, and Claude will sort of say, okay, go and edit this instruction file in these settings. But it can't do it itself, whereas Claude Cowork has this ability to sort of edit its own instructions and make itself a bit smarter just by editing text files. So one thing you can do in Cowork is set up these scheduled tasks. I'm going to show you this very quickly in Claude. You can say to Claude, every day at 9 a.m., I want you to run this task. Or every Friday at 4 p.m., I want you to run this task. And as long as your computer is switched on and Cowork is open, why is my computer deciding to freeze now? Give me 2 seconds and I'll just find the right section. As long as your computer's open and Cowork is open, it will run that task for you, and you could be out having a coffee, you could be eating lunch, and it will just kind of work through this task for you. So this is very easy to set up. If you go into Claude and then you go to scheduled here, you can just say start a new scheduled task. You can either talk to Claude about it or you can set it up manually. And then you can say, every Friday at 4 or every weekday at 8 a.m. or they have some templates you can use as well. So this is a great way of getting Claude to do work for you without you having to prompt it every time. And so when we have the ability to set up these scheduled tasks, we can schedule Claude to reflect on the work we're doing and look for ways to improve our setup. So I have this self-review task. Again, I will share this with you afterwards. And basically every Friday, it looks through the conversations that you've been having and it produces a short report on automations that might help you, or skills that might help you, or new integrations that you should probably set up, or new files that you should put in your second brain so that Claude stops asking the same question. And so if you set this up once, then every Friday, Claude does this review where it thinks, how can I make your setup more effective and more intelligent? And so, for example, it might say, I saw that you were drafting cold emails from scratch this week and you did it 3 times. Why don't we turn that into a skill so that you can just use the kind of cold email skill and save a lot of time? Or in a few of your conversations this week, you mentioned an October cohort, but there's nothing in context about that yet. Shall we update our goals file so that we've logged that somewhere? Or there were 4 times where you pasted in a screenshot of your calendar. Shall we just connect the calendar now so that I, Claude, can read the calendar instead? And then this is what I mean by Claude suggesting improvements to itself. There's a file in Claude called claude.md, which basically tells Claude how to behave. And so Claude can say, I think we should edit this, and then I will behave in a different way from next week. So Claude is doing a bit of a retro on itself and saying, here's how I could be more useful for you specifically. And so if you do this, then Claude gets smarter and basically compounds every single week. And if you don't do this, then it's kind of on you to think about the improvements. So you have to keep thinking, I should create a skill. Maybe I should add an integration. Maybe I should add some more context, which is not something that we all have capacity to think about. We're not all thinking in systems all the time, but Claude is. And so if you set this up, then every Friday, it looks for ways to improve itself. And again, I'll send this skill round afterwards. You just need to go into Cowork, set up a scheduled task, and then run this skill. And your setup will get better every Friday morning. There's a question on, am I running Cowork locally or on a VPS? I'm running it locally. I'm just running Cowork on my laptop, sort of vanilla Cowork. All right, we have 2 more and 11 minutes. This has worked out very nicely. Okay, hands up if you've ever done a retro at your company before, retrospective. Sometimes they're effective, sometimes they're really boring. But when done correctly, a retro is incredibly helpful for noting down what went well, what we can improve, lessons that we learned, and generally making the organization or the team a little bit better every week. And so if you're working with Claude a lot, if Claude Cowork is becoming, in a sense, your assistant or your co-worker, your sort of agentic co-worker, then it can help you run a retro yourself, and it can basically hold you accountable to the things that you said were important. So I've been doing this for about 2 or 3 months. I think I've done about 10 of these now. And this was inspired by my friend Jean-Michel. I'm not sure if he's in the chat, but I now go through this process of reflecting on the week with Claude and planning out my next week. And it's quite systematic and it's quite comprehensive. So let me run you through it. I run this skill, and firstly, it looks at my calendar and it checks where I spent my time. So like, was I in loads of meetings? Did I have an empty week? Was I traveling? Was I on holiday? Did I have loads of stuff going on in the evenings? Did I exercise enough? Like, these are actually all questions that Claude asks. And it's just connected to my calendar so it can sort of see what I did this week and it can see what's coming up next week. I use an app called Todoist as my to-do tracker. And Claude just takes a quick look at that and sees what I completed and what's on my to-do list. And it also looks at, whatever metric matters most to me. So if it's revenue, if it's signups, it sort of checks, am I on track? This is slightly simplified. My Claude actually goes into Xero and checks invoices. It goes into Stripe and looks at payments. It looks at my CRM and tells me like the state of my pipeline. But it basically does like a full metrics review and says, okay, here's where we are versus the target. If I had any important meetings, Claude goes and just gets the summaries. And then it looks at the last 3 retros that I did. So last Friday, the Friday before that, and the Friday before that, what did I talk about? What did I say I was going to do? So it gathers all of this sort of evidence. Then, because it knows my patterns, it will actually like hold me to account on things that I said I was going to do and I haven't done. And genuinely, this has been really helpful. Like, I said to a few friends, maybe 2 or 3 months ago, I think I should hire a video editor. Like, I have all these videos, I'm not editing them. And I started to mention this in my retro, and then by the 4th week, Claude was like, what are you doing? You said this is really important and you haven't gone and found an editor yet. Like, let's do it. Like, how can we make progress here? So just really, really helpful for accountability and spotting the pieces of work that you keep putting off, or the patterns that you're sort of falling into, or the work that you said was important and you didn't do. Then Claude asks me for a bit of a brain dump. It just says like, what's on your mind about next week? Just like, talk to me. It runs me through a structured interview, and then it starts prioritizing my tasks and basically helps me figure out like, okay, I've just mentioned 15 discrete things that I want to do next week. But if I could only do 1, what would it be? And if I could only do 2, what would those 2 be? And it creates this ranked list of things and then puts it back into my to-do list. And then finally, it writes everything to a file, a retro file, and it helps me build a bit of a plan for the next week. And then, it schedules stuff in my task manager. I run this manually at the moment, but again, you could just schedule this in Cowork. You could say at 5 p.m. every Friday, trigger the retro skill and let's go through it. You can rush through this in 10 minutes. I sometimes spend an hour on it, but genuinely, this has not only like improved my own productivity, effectiveness, but it keeps making Claude smarter because it keeps gathering all this context that Claude then sort of sorts away on its own. So, I'll send you that skill afterwards. It's called Weekly Retro. I think it's one of the most valuable in here. And that leads on to our final way of making Claude improve itself. I haven't really had a chance to explain skills in a lot of detail. Again, a skill is just a long prompt, a bit like a recipe. You can share them across your team. You can download skills from the internet. You can create your own skills. They're incredible. And there's a lot of like hit and miss skills online. Some are good, some are bad. But there's actually a really good directory called skills.sh, where people have voted on skills they find helpful. Now, a lot of these are like developer focused, but if I search like sales, then people have put together all these different like sales qualification skills, sales compensation for figuring out compensation of reps, sales briefing, like you can see how many people have installed it, and so you can get a bit of a flavor for which ones are popular. Now, we can give Claude a skill called find skills, and as we're doing pieces of work, Claude will say, actually, a skill exists for this, and it's had 20,000 installs. It's probably good. Do you want me to check it out before we use it? So you're basically having Claude look at the work you're doing, and then when it sees you doing something that someone else has codified, it will say, by the way, before we proceed, do you want to try out this skill that I've just found? And then it will install it for you. So before installing this, you had to sort of be thinking about skills, and you had to be thinking, should I write the cold email or should I go and look for a skill? And if you're busy, you're just going to start writing the cold email. However, if you install, it sounds a bit silly when I say it out loud. If you install the find skills skill, and then you say to Claude, I'm writing a cold outreach email, please help me, then it'll come back and it'll say, actually, there is a skill for that with 73,000 installs. And then it will audit it. So it will tell you who made it. It will tell you like if it's safe to use. It will just check that it's not trying to like do anything naughty. And then it will like snapshot that version so that if someone makes an update in the future, you've just got that version. So basically it's saying there's a very popular skill. I think it would help you right now. And by the way, I've done a quick security audit and it's safe to install. It's not going to do anything dangerous. And so now you have Claude just constantly looking for new skills to help you get work done faster. And again, that is actually a skill by Vercel, who made skills.sh. And the skill is called Find Skills. And I'll send you a link to that afterwards. All right, somehow I've gotten through all 10 in 56 minutes. So that was, 10 things that I think will improve Claude. Instead of Claude feeling like this sort of smart stranger that asks you to really explain yourself all the time, it does actually become a bit of a co-worker that knows about you, that gives you more reliable answers. And every Friday is basically trying to like make itself smarter. So if you enjoyed this, very small plug, I run a 4-week program called the Agent Accelerator. We go into all of this in more detail through workshops on a Tuesday afternoon and a Friday afternoon, and actually the next one starts tomorrow. So if you feel like you want to figure all this stuff out and you want more interactive workshops like this, then send me a message and you can join before tomorrow if you are keen. All right, I can stick around for some questions. So if you have any like big questions, there's a lot of thank yous. Thank you very much. If you have burning questions, then like I will stick around another like 10, 15 minutes if anyone would like to go through anything. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your afternoons and thank you for coming. Lots of thank yous. Any questions? Feel free to fire away. It's a very good question from Elizabeth. How can you be 100% sure that it reads all the lines of these imported skills every single time? So I will send this afterwards, but I have added an instruction to Claude.md that says, whenever I mention a skill, you have to go and audit it and you have to follow these steps. Claude.md is usually reliable, but not like 100% reliable. So it almost always remembers if I say, hey, here's a skill, I want to install it, my Claude comes back and says, hang on a minute, let's just run an audit. And that probably works like 99 out of 100 times. But I don't think there's a way to like 100% guarantee it. So basically, if you set up Claude, I'll send the instructions afterwards. If you set up Claude to audit skills all the time, then you'll see it doing that and you'll start thinking, oh yeah, I should never install something without auditing it. And then if Claude forgets one time, hopefully you have learned I should go and audit it. All right. In terms of more questions, there's a question from Mursad on you've done my V1 course from March, thinking about joining the next course. It's all been refreshed. All the materials are much, much better, much more recent. And actually, the next cohort that starts tomorrow has like even more contact time. I can follow up with you afterwards if you want to talk about that more. Rod's asked, were the installs via Cowork or Code? Everything I just showed you works in Cowork. I guess the truth is I run my entire business in Claude Code. So everything I just showed you works in both. And that folder I talked about, I can open it in Cowork, I can open it in Code. If I want to use OpenAI's Codex, I can open that folder in Codex and it has all the context. But yes, every single thing in this workshop is possible and achievable through Cowork. Can you do a weekly retro with another person? Yes. I think you could send them a message and say, do you want to get a meeting room and talk about the last week? You could create a skill that sort of like asks you both certain questions and then, prepares a briefing for you to then talk about it. But yeah, I mean, you could sort of take whatever we've got with Claude and you could adjust it for human teammates as well. Andrea asked, how do you get the files on my PC versus in the cloud? In Cowork, it will generally, when you say create a file about this, like create some context files, it will usually default to creating these like markdown files for you. So Cowork will usually do stuff on your machine. Claude Chat will usually do stuff in the cloud. James, do I work more up? Okay, just answered Jake's question. I work in Claude Code because it's just a little bit faster. It's just a little bit more powerful. And actually, I started using Claude Code in October, and then Cowork came out in sort of January, February, and I was just really comfortable in Claude Code by that point. But everything that's possible in Claude Code, they seem to be adding to Cowork a few weeks or months later. So I think Claude Cowork is just giving you like everything in Claude Code, but in a more accessible, less sort of nerdy fashion. Can Claude read multiple Google Calendars? I was talking about this with someone last week. I don't know if it can. I think when you connect a calendar, it asks you for one email address. If your one email address has multiple calendars inside it, so like my personal email has the default calendar, and then I think it has like I think I have like a swimming pool's calendar that shows when my local pool is open. I think Claude can see both of them because they're inside the same like account. But if you have like a work account and a personal account on two different email addresses, I think you could only connect one. There are some workarounds, I just haven't figured them out yet. But I will go away and look into that because I've had a few people asking that question. How do I get Claude Cowork and Granola to speak to each other? There's a Granola connector in Claude, and that basically allows Claude to look through all your transcripts and all your summaries. If you go into connectors and then search Granola, it should be there. Oh, that's an interesting question from Cara. Students at university afraid of getting penalized for using Claude. How do I see the future of all of this for uni students? I don't know how they're going to police it. I mean, when I look back on university myself, let me just stop sharing my screen as well. When I think about uni, I did computer science, and there were many nights where I was up till 4 a.m. trying to figure out a problem, and I just couldn't, and I was just really stuck, and I had to wait until like my supervision the next day. And if I'd had AI, then Claude would have been able to kind of walk me through the problem and help me understand something. And having Claude would effectively be like having an infinitely patient tutor 24/7 that could explain anything to you. So if the student is disciplined, then that's incredible. But if I just said to Claude, solve all my problems for me, do my homework, I wouldn't really be learning. And if I said to Claude, write my essays, obviously I'd probably get into trouble for that. So I don't know. I reckon maybe universities will work with Anthropic and OpenAI to create sort of educational versions of these LLMs that don't just do the work for you, but actually sort of like coach you or tutor you through it. Okay, a few more questions. Security risks. How can we be sure that nothing gets passed on to Anthropic? Very good question. If you're on a business plan, Anthropic is not training on your data. So if you've set up a team plan, a business plan, an enterprise plan, Anthropic is not going to train its models on your data. If you're on a personal plan, you need to go into settings and tell them, please do not train on my data. And I'll just show you how to do that very quickly. So if I just pull this over here and share my screen again. The way I think about this is like the way I think about Google or Microsoft. Like I trust Google to hold my files in Google Drive, and I trust Anthropic to work on my files, but I don't want Anthropic making their models smarter with my information. And so if I show you here, I've gone into Claude. So I've gone here and then settings, and then I've gone into privacy, and then this button, you want to switch that off because by default that is on if you're on a personal plan. So you want to go into settings, into privacy, and then tell Anthropic, do not train on my data. I do not want you to do that. And that at least stops the training of data. The question of like, can Anthropic be trusted with my, like, you know, operating on my data? That's a question for every individual and every organization to make themselves or to decide on themselves. I trust Anthropic with my information, and I trust that they're not training on my data, and I've told them, do not do that. How do I choose what model to use? I use Opus all the time because I'm on a plan that has quite a high limit. I pay Anthropic £200 a month, and I rarely hit limits with Opus. But I know that people on team plans paying like £20 or £90 a month, if they leave Opus on, they hit the limits very quickly. So I'll just, again, if this is all new to you, let me just show you quickly what I'm actually talking about. When you're operating in Claude, there's 3 models that you can use. So if you go here, there's Haiku, Sonnet, and Opus. And if you've never thought about this before, a haiku is like a very short 3-line poem. A sonnet is a slightly longer poem, and then an opus is a story. So this is your sort of cheapest, quickest, but least intelligent model. Sonnet is like really good and quite fast, and then opus is like your more sort of comprehensive, complex model. So I leave opus on. I put it on high effort mode, which makes it a little bit slower, but just has it do a bit more reasoning. I've tried extra before and it's really slow. I've tried low effort and predictably it was giving me slightly low effort responses. It was really quick, but it wasn't really thinking through its answers too deeply. So if you can do it without hitting limits, I suggest Opus on sort of medium to high effort. Otherwise, stick to Sonnet, which is still really good. I think it's something like 90% as good as Opus, but just much faster, much cheaper, uses fewer tokens. And I'd probably set that to like medium or high effort. A few more questions. There's a question from Ed. Even subagents. You're going to have to elaborate on that. I don't know what you're asking there. Why would you use Cowork or Code? I think I talked about that a little bit earlier. Like Claude Code is just a bit faster, and you can access it if I share my screen again. Why do I keep stopping? Let's just leave this on. You can just click this Code tab, and then it's very similar to Cowork. You're sort of talking with Claude here. I guess one thing about Claude Code is it is very eager to build stuff, and sometimes you'll say, you know, I'm working on this email or I'm doing something, and then Claude Code will say, do you want me to build an app that does this, or do you want me to build a website that achieves this? And you don't want that. You just want to talk about the problem. So I think Claude Code's great, and this is like, I guess, the easiest way to use it. I actually use Claude Code in this thing called the terminal. So I just type answers here, or I type prompts here, and Claude just kind of whizzes through and does quick work for me. That's like the fastest way to use Claude Code. This is the easiest way to use Claude Code, but my recommendation is for like 90% of people, you don't need Claude Code, and Cowork here will give you pretty much everything you need for like all your knowledge work, all your automating integrations. I think Cowork is very suitable for most people. Is there a cheat sheet for when you should start in chat versus code versus Cowork? Yes, I do have one. Let me see if I can find it quickly. Generally, I think Cowork, I view Cowork as either I'm building something, I'm sort of like putting something together, working on like a set of documents, some slides, a new email. I'm sort of doing like a multi-step project. If I just need a quick answer, I'll probably go into Claude Chat and just talk to Claude Chat. But as you start building this second brain, you start wanting all your conversations to take place there. So if all your context is in Cowork, you're going to get better answers from like continuing to work in Cowork than if you like open a fresh chat which doesn't have those files. So I generally advise people pick one, focus on like putting all your context in there. If you're going to use Claude Chat, then just create something called a project. If you're in Cowork, create this folder and then just stick to that and you'll get these like sort of progressively more and more helpful answers from Claude. Let me see if I can I do have a cheat sheet. Let me see if I can quickly find the diagram. If not, I can share it with you afterwards. No, I don't have the diagram. I will share that afterwards. Okay, I've got time for a few more questions and then I'm going to have to go. Wow, there's still 50 of you here. Okay, brilliant. Robert, will there be a cohort 4? Yes. So the program that I'm running starting tomorrow is like my third cohort of the Accelerator. I've run 2 so far with about 200 people. Went pretty well. People generally enjoy it and 95% would recommend it. I'm not doing another one until about October. So if you want to get involved, then tomorrow is like a good time to do it. Otherwise, the next one will be October. Just catching up on the chat. There's many businesses here have to use Copilot. I looked into Copilot a couple of weeks ago and it's just way behind Claude. So if you're one of those people that has to use Copilot, I would be lobbying hard to try and get Claude. A lot of these concepts do apply. Like if you're in Copilot, I think there's a notion of projects. Generally, like the more context any agent has on you, the better its answers are going to be. So if you're using Copilot, just try to find a way to give it context that is saved somewhere so that you're not re-explaining yourself every time. But yeah, when I looked into Copilot, it's quite far behind. I know some people whose company uses Copilot and then they are basically like trying out Claude as a sort of piece of R&D. And they're using it as, you know, an individual on their work email, and then they're coming back and showing everyone this is better than Copilot. But if you're at a company using Copilot, it might be quite a big company, and so you might have to get some friends together to lobby for Claude. Do subagents work in Cowork? Yes, they absolutely do. You sometimes have to explicitly tell Claude, please use subagents. But yes, Claude, I think Cowork can spin up 10 subagents at a time. So even, you know, I talked about like the 4 different perspectives on something, but like if you're doing research, you can say spin up 10 subagents to go and research these 10 competitors, and then they'll each go away and work in parallel instead of Claude going through each one sequentially. Rod's asked my view of OpenClaw. It's more secure than it was a few months ago, but I'm still just waiting for Anthropic to build the features of OpenClaw. I think it's much safer. If you haven't heard of OpenClaw, it's just a slightly risky agent framework that I unfortunately don't have time to go into today. All right. I think that's all we have time for. I'm going to send you like the most comprehensive email with all of this, like links to all the skills, links to all the integrations. If you would like to join the Accelerator, then like there's going to be a link there as well. Just make sure that you've added my email to your safe senders list. So my email is hello@jamesmacaulay.co.uk. Just make sure that like I'm not going to go into your spam. And I will be sending that in about 3 hours, I reckon. So just follow that along. One thing I've noticed is that there's like so much information out there on AI. And you could go and watch like 100 YouTube tutorials. You could come to 5 more workshops like this. The people who make progress are just the ones that like carve out time and just like make time to try this stuff out. So even if trying out 10 different things sounds overwhelming, when you get that email, maybe just pick like 2 and just put something in your calendar to like go and set them up, and you will get better results from Claude. Okay, thank you so much everyone for joining, and then for 30 of you sticking around until 15 minutes past. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you later. Bye.